Hello, my name is Angie Carrick and I am a hypnotherapist and a hypnobirthing practitioner, and I run my own little business called Blossom Birthing. Now, for the past week I have been dedicating my Blossom Birthing page to raising awareness about tokophobia. I have with me my little notebook so that if I forget anything in particular I can refer back to my notes. But to start with, if you're wondering what tokophobia is the extreme fear of childbirth and pregnancy. And there are two different types. Primary tokophobia refers to women that have an extreme fear of childbirth when they haven't actually experienced it themselves, so they don't have any children. And secondary tokophobia is directly involved with women that have developed this after they have had children themselves. So when we talk about tokophobia, there are a couple of things that need to be clarified. And the first one, and this is mainly through the mums and women that I have been talking to, is this whole idea of the word phobia attached to the word. And it is one of those little things that I think we need to be aware of, especially if you're trying to help anyone that you believe might be suffering from this fear. And mainly what has come up from most mums that I have spoken to is this whole idea that by calling it a phobia, it's something that's irrational. And I have to say that a phobia doesn't actually have to be irrational, and in this case it very much isn't something that's irrational. The problem is that when we try to define things a lot of the time, we tend to go to things like the Oxford Dictionary, and if you actually look at what a phobia is described as in the dictionary, it's described as an extreme or irrational fear or an aversion to something. And I think sometimes this can lead us to almost have a certain understanding of something that is not particularly what that mum might be feeling or that woman might be feeling. So we just need to be a little bit conscientious about, you know, what what our perception of that word is, and ultimately what their perception of that word is. I think that the best bit that I found myself is if you actually go on the Mind website, where they actually look at mental health, a phobia is actually described as an anxiety disorder. And I think when you actually look at the extreme fear of childbirth, anxiety is definitely one of those symptoms that is definitely within that, and something that a lot of mums and women experience when they're talking about childbirth and this fear. And if you look at their definition, it's described as an extreme fear or anxiety triggered by a particular situation or object. And I think this is a far better description of what a phobia actually is, especially in this particular instance. Of course, there are other phobias out there that can be described as irrational, but not in this case. So I think the first bit that I want to talk about was those women that are out there, those women that need the extra support and the extra help, those women that feel this extreme fear of childbirth, what can they actually do from a medical point of view? And the bit that I found the most useful was that the Pan-London Perinatal Mental Health Networks have actually created a toolkit. And this toolkit, you know, I've read it back to front, and it's incredibly helpful. And one of the reasons why it is so helpful is because not only it details what kind of help you can have, but it also shows you on there a timeline care pathway. And this is, for me, quite crucial because it shows you, depending on what maternity care you have, depending on when your midwifery sessions are and your different visits, what extra help you should be expecting if you've actually raised that you actually feel tokophobic and that you need that extra support. And equally from the point of view of, if you're not part of the NHS, if you don't live here in the UK, this document is extremely helpful to take anywhere with you and to start the conversations with your own caregivers and ask them the question of what is actually available and what extra support is there. And one of the reasons why this was created in the UK was so that the same level of service could actually be provided to every woman out there. And for me, this is incredibly useful in terms of trying to create a better service, a service that is actually even across the UK. And if, like I say, if you're not sure what available are there for you, have a read, print it out, take it with you, and simply have the conversation with your GP or your midwife and say, look, I found this on the internet. Can you advise me further? Is there anything that you guys do that might be able to be similar to this? And equally, it even explains it in the toolkit that St Thomas and London Hospital has a weekly tokophobia clinic. This is something that I found quite useful because if you are actually wanting to talk to somebody in a bit more of a relaxed sort of environment rather than necessarily when you're having your own consultation. If you wanted to talk to within a group and to a number of different experts, this is something really useful to attend. The other side in terms of looking at potential things that you can actually do is, okay, so I've spoken to my GP, I've spoken to my caregivers at the hospital, what can I do myself? I've written a blog which actually looks at holistic approaches to the extreme fear of childbirth and what you can do if you wanted to try something a little bit different. Of course, I'm going to be completely biased here and talk about hypnotherapy. And hypnotherapy is one of those types of therapies that can be useful in these sort of cases, especially because you can actually go and work with the subconscious in a relaxed manner that is not invasive, and work with women to actually look at why they feel the way that they feel. Why do they feel that the situation, you know, if we're talking about secondary tokophobia, why that situation was traumatic for them. And ultimately what you do is you work through the trauma to try and process the information and ultimately make them feel a lot better about the situation. You don't take it away, you simply help, you know, the mind rationalize what has actually happened and help them move on from that trauma. The second thing that I mentioned there, even though, you know, hypnotherapy might not be for you, it might not be something that you feel comfortable with, that's absolutely fine. My biggest recommendation is that you talk about it. So the other recommendation that I make on there is about counselling. Seeking help from a counsellor can be incredibly helpful, mainly because again they'll help you process the information and ultimately reframe what has actually happened. And talking to your friends might be fantastic, but ultimately they're not a professional. And speaking to somebody like a counsellor where they can actually provide you professional help and where they can actually give advice from, you know, from somebody that has dealt with these situations in the past, might be incredibly helpful for you. Equally, the last thing that I mentioned is the idea of group work. So there are a lot of places across the UK that run trauma groups. Generally speaking, they are run by an expert in the field. So it might be a midwife, it might be a hypnobirthing teacher, it might be somebody that has experienced this, gone and found further information, and now runs groups for women in which women can actually come to the group and discuss their own experiences. In this way, women can actually learn from each other and create a support create a support group that can actually give them the support and understanding that they actually need. And I think a lot of the time when you're dealing with something like an extreme phobia of childbirth, knowing that there are other people like you out there that have felt the same way, that have experienced the same way, and that you're not alone, is an incredibly helpful thing to have and incredibly useful, especially if you are looking to have further children. You will need that support network around you, so it is a really nice thing to have. Of course, it's not for everyone, but this is something that you can do. Lastly, I wanted to look at things that, what if you don't feel ready to talk to your doctor? What if you are contemplating the idea of having a family, you are maybe contemplating the idea of having your second baby, but you don't feel ready to have that conversation with your GP or anybody else for that matter? And I think, you know, a lot of the time there is this pressure on trying to deal with the situation by going externally, and there's not enough support out there for what can you actually do yourself to try and improve the situation. And I think it's completely fine. I think it's absolutely fine if you don't feel ready yet to go and speak to somebody else. And I think especially in a situation like this, when it's something that's so incredibly personal, it's absolutely fine for you to actually want to try and do something yourself before you actually seek help elsewhere. One of the things that I recommend to a lot of people that have gone through any form of trauma is writing therapy. You might have heard about writing a journal, you know, keeping those ideas on a daily basis and writing generally. But one of the things that I believe is actually very helpful is actually writing a letter. And writing therapy can be incredibly therapeutic, and equally when you're actually putting, you know, pen to paper, it allows your mind to actually process information. It allows your mind to think about what you're writing and rationalize why you're writing what you're saying. And at the same time, it's about bringing those emotions up, and it's about expressing them in a way that, you know, it's still quite private, you're not having to share it with anybody else, but equally you can start the healing process yourself. And my best recommendation is that you write a letter to say yourself if that's useful to you, or if you've gone through a very traumatic experience that maybe you want to direct that letter to the doctor or the midwife, or you want to, you know, write that letter to anyone else that you might feel that is actually useful. I remember reading an article not too long ago about somebody that had experienced extreme fear of childbirth to the extent that they had actually chosen never to start a family, and they believed that the root cause of this extreme fear had actually been in primary school, when they actually shown a video of a woman giving birth, and this girl felt that she had been so traumatized by the experience that she never wanted to experience that herself. So in a situation like that, when maybe the trauma goes back a number of years, one of the things that I would actually recommend is that you write a letter to that person. So if you were speaking to that 7-year-old, 20-year-old, or whoever it was, what would you like to say to them? And equally, I would seek information about what is the positive message that you want to pass along. If the positive message is that, you know, yes, childbirth can be scary, childbirth can be dangerous, but ultimately there are a lot of, you know, successful stories out there. It can be a wonderful experience, and it can be an experience that is not full of pain and screaming and so on and so forth. Look out into the world and to, you know, what information you can actually find that supports the message that you want to give yourself, and write it in that letter. Allow yourself to almost put to your prior self what you would have liked to been told at the time, and what would have helped you at the time to actually process that information and deal with, you know, what ultimately became a very traumatic event. I hope that you have found the information that I've given you very useful. If you've got any further comments or anything that you want me to take on board, feel more than free to send me a quick message. This is my first video, and I hope that you have found it very useful. Thank you.